The crowd gathered in the town square of Cafijo, faces glowing with pride as the new hospital's doors opened. Reporters held their cameras high, capturing the moment the mayor stepped onto the stage. He smiled, voice firm and clear, as he read the name that had changed everything: Amina. The same Amina who had left this town years ago with nothing but shame and a broken heart. Once called a mistake, she now stood tall among applause, the woman who built the hospital that saved hundreds of lives. Her father stood at the back, hands shaking, eyes wet. The man who once told her she would never matter now watched the whole town cheer her name. Amina's gaze found him for a moment. No anger, just quiet strength. The same hands that had once pushed her away had grown old, trembling under guilt. The newspaper headline the next morning told it all. Amina returns home as the woman who saved Cafijo. But behind that line was something no camera could capture. The look on a father's face when he finally understood that the child he rejected had become the hero who healed his world. The sun was bright over Cafijo that morning, and the schoolyard was filled with laughter, drums, and the smell of fresh paint. Banners fluttered above the new sign that read the Amina Hope Scholarship Foundation. Children in clean uniforms ran around holding balloons, while proud parents stood clapping, some wiping away tears. Amina stood quietly behind the microphone, her hands folded, her smile calm but full of emotion. No one in the crowd knew the long nights she had spent alone to make this day real. No one had seen her skipping meals to save money, working 2 jobs, studying by candlelight, and dreaming that one day, no child in her town would be denied a future because of poverty. As the mayor spoke, praising her kindness, her mind drifted back to the day she left home. Her father's voice still echoed in her memory, harsh, cold, and final. "You'll never become anything. You're a waste." She had carried those words for years, letting them burn quietly inside her until they turned into fuel. That pain became purpose. That anger became light. And now, watching children dance in their new shoes, she realized something powerful. She had built more than a scholarship. She had built hope. A group of mothers came to thank her, holding her hands, tears in their eyes. One said, "Because of you, my son will be the first in our family to read." Amina felt her throat tighten. The world seemed to blur for a moment as the applause began again. She looked up at the sky, whispering a small prayer, not for revenge, not for recognition, but for peace. Somewhere in that crowd, her father stood at a distance, half hidden behind the trees. He had come quietly, afraid to face her. His eyes followed her as she laughed with the children, his heart heavy with the memory of the words he could never take back. Amina didn't see him, but maybe she felt it, the weight of his regret carried by the wind. The ceremony ended with a song, and as hundreds of children lifted their voices, Amina finally smiled. The girl he once rejected had built a door to every dream he said would never exist. The old factory stood at the edge of Cafijo, silent and broken, its walls covered in dust and memories. Years ago, it had been the pride of the town, and of Amina's father. He used to boast about it to anyone who would listen, calling it the symbol of his success. But when his business failed and the factory closed, everything around him fell apart, including his pride. The place became a ruin, just like his once powerful voice. Amina remembered standing outside those gates as a child, hearing her father laugh at her dreams, telling her she would never understand what real success looked like. Years later, Amina returned, not as the quiet girl he had dismissed, but as a woman who had built her own fortune. She had worked her way up, step by step, saving every coin, learning every lesson life threw at her. The townspeople were shocked when the news spread. The derelict factory had been bought by none other than Amina. No one believed it until they saw her standing there, keys in hand, her head held high. Within months, the factory came alive again. Machines roared, lights shone from the windows, and laughter filled the air as she hired dozens of workers, men and women who had once lost hope. Families found steady income, children went back to school, and Cafijo began to breathe again. Every payday, people whispered her name with gratitude, calling her a miracle. Her father came to see it one evening, walking slowly through the gates that once belonged to him. The guards recognized him and let him in. He stood there, looking at the signboard, Amina Industries. His hands trembled as he touched the letters, realizing the daughter he had shamed had rebuilt everything he had destroyed. Inside, he saw her talking with workers, laughing, giving instructions, confident and kind. She noticed him from across the hall, their eyes meeting for the first time in years. There was no anger in her face, only quiet strength. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. She walked toward him, calm and steady. "Welcome home, Baba," she said softly. In that moment he understood. The life he once scorned had become the one that saved them both. The community hall in Cafijo was packed that day. The town had gathered for a public forum to discuss the new development projects, and everyone was buzzing with excitement. Cameras flashed, local reporters filled the aisles, and people whispered when Amina walked in. She was no longer just the girl who had once left in tears. She was now a respected woman whose name carried weight. Sitting at the front was her father, invited as an honored elder. He hadn't spoken to her in years, but there she was, standing confidently before the microphone. When her turn came to speak, Amina began calmly, her voice steady but full of emotion. She talked about growth, forgiveness, and the importance of giving people second chances. Then slowly her words turned personal. "Some of us," she said, looking toward her father, "know what it's like to be told we are nothing, to be called a shame. But I stand here today as proof that no one has the right to decide someone else's worth." The room went silent. The only sound was the clicking of cameras. Her father's eyes dropped to the floor. He tried to smile, but guilt filled every line on his face. Someone recorded the moment and posted it online. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. People across the country shared it with captions like "The daughter who spoke her truth" and "Forgiveness in strength." Talk shows discussed it. Newspapers ran headlines, and thousands of young women wrote to Amina, saying she had given them courage. Some praised her for her grace, others cried watching her father's stunned silence. Amina didn't expect fame. She didn't want revenge. All she wanted was to show that pain could turn into purpose. Her father, meanwhile, couldn't escape the wave of attention. Strangers stopped him on the street, asking how it felt to be the man who rejected his own daughter. For the first time in his life, he had to face the truth in front of the world. Weeks later, when the noise faded, he visited her quietly at her office. He looked smaller, softer. "You spoke well," he said, his voice shaking. Amina smiled gently. "I didn't speak to shame you, Baba," she said. "I spoke so others wouldn't have to live that way." And in that moment, the silence between them finally broke. The fire started just after midnight. Flames tore through the sky, painting Cafijo in a terrible orange glow. The old warehouse near the river was burning fast, and the wind carried sparks toward nearby homes. People screamed, running through the streets trying to save whatever they could. Panic spread like the fire itself. Within minutes, Amina was there, rushing to the scene in her car, her phone already in her hand, calling the fire department and alerting volunteers. She didn't stop to think. She shouted orders, directed people to form lines, told the young men to bring buckets, and made sure the elders were safe. Her calm voice cut through the chaos. "Don't panic, we can control this," she said again and again. The firefighters arrived, but the flames were fierce. Amina climbed onto a truck, shouting instructions, helping pull hoses, her clothes covered in ash. Neighbors watched in awe. The same girl once called a mistake was now leading the whole town through disaster. Hours later, when the fire was finally out, the warehouse was gone, a heap of smoking ruins. People sat in the street crying. Families had lost their small businesses, their savings, their dreams. Amina stood among them, exhausted but steady. She made a promise that night: the town would rise again. Within a week, she started a rebuilding fund, donating her own money and rallying others to join. Her hospital staff, her company workers, even strangers from other cities sent help. Slowly, brick by brick, Cafijo began to heal. Her father stood on the edge of the crowd the next morning, watching her speak to the townspeople. The light from the sunrise hit her face, and for a moment he saw her not as the daughter he once scolded, but as the leader she had become. Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't hide them this time. He remembered the night years ago when he had told her she was weak, that she would never survive in this world. Now he saw her standing taller than anyone, covered in soot yet shining with courage. When she turned and noticed him, he couldn't speak. She simply nodded as if to say, "It's okay." And for the first time in his life, he understood what real strength looked like, not power, not pride, but compassion. Years passed and Cafijo became almost unrecognizable. Where old dusty roads once lay, new buildings stood tall, schools filled with children, and hospitals ran smoothly. In the heart of the town, workers gathered around a new project, a grand community center, Amina's final gift to her people. She called it the House of Hope. The building was bright and open, with wide halls, a library, classrooms, and a hall for town gatherings. Every brick carried a story of someone Amina had helped, and every wall seemed to whisper gratitude. On the day of the opening, the whole town came together again, just as they had when the hospital was built. Banners waved in the warm breeze, children sang songs, and elders smiled with pride. Inside, there was a long wall made of stone, carved with hundreds of names, teachers, farmers, nurses, and children whose lives had been changed through Amina's work. Near the center of that wall was a small bronze plaque that read, "For my father who taught me what not to give up on." The crowd cheered when the plaque was revealed, but one man stood still in silence, Amina's father. He was older now, his hands shaking as he traced his fingers over the carved words. His throat tightened as memories flooded back, the harsh things he said, the nights she cried, the years of pride that had built a wall between them. He had spent a lifetime chasing wealth and reputation, but now he realized that true legacy wasn't found in money or property. It was in people, in love, in the lives one touched. Amina noticed him standing alone by the plaque. She walked toward him quietly, her footsteps soft on the marble floor. When he turned to face her, his eyes were wet and his voice barely a whisper. "You remembered me," he said. Amina smiled gently. "You're part of my story, Baba. Every lesson, even the painful ones, made me who I am." He nodded slowly, unable to hold back his tears. The people continued to celebrate behind them, music echoing through the hall. But for Amina and her father, that small plaque meant everything. It was forgiveness written in stone, a love reborn through memory, and a legacy that time could never erase. The letter came on a quiet morning, the envelope thin and trembling in the postman's hand. Amina almost didn't open it. The handwriting on it was weak but familiar, her father's. Inside, the paper carried only a few lines, written with shaking letters. "My daughter, I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. I was blind, proud, and cruel. I see now what you became, and I see what I lost. If you can, come before I go." Amina read it over and over, tears falling silently. Memories of his harsh words, the years of pain, and the small moments of longing all rushed back. She sat for a long time before finally driving to the old house. The smell of medicine and old wood filled the air. Her father lay on the bed, thinner than she remembered, his eyes tired but hopeful. When he saw her, he tried to speak, but no words came out. Amina took his hand gently. For years she had dreamed of this moment, of what she might say if it ever came. But standing there, all anger melted away. "It's okay, Baba," she whispered. "You can rest now." His eyes filled with tears, and a faint smile crossed his face before he closed his eyes for the last time. Weeks later, at his funeral, people spoke not of his mistakes but of the daughter who forgave him. And in that forgiveness, Amina gave him the peace he could never give himself.